Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video. Those of you who have been watching me for a while know that one of my favorite genres to read is Singlit, or fiction written by Singaporeans, and I've gone back and relabeled a lot of my videos into a series called Singlit Shelf. So if you're interested in my other reviews of Singlit, you should be able to find them more easily on my channel. Today I'm going to talk about a book that I actually read last year but never got around to speaking about. It's called The Original Daugher by Jemimah Wei, and I really liked this book and immediately bought it for several of my friends. It was also really exciting because Jemimah Wei came to Singapore to do a little book tour, and I actually went to one of her events. Shout out to BX for letting me join the Columbia Alumni Association. I think BX just reached out to Jemimah. I don't think Jemimah went to Columbia or anything. And that talk was really interesting because I got a lot of insight into how Jemimah approached the story. But just to give you a little bit of an overview, the main character in this book is Genevieve Yang, and she is growing up in Singapore in the 90s when another girl, her name is Arin, joins the household. She comes from Malaysia because her family doesn't want to take care of her anymore. And then we follow this friendship, this kind of sisterhood between the two girls as they grow up and as they kind of pursue different paths in life. I really loved the tone and the character of Singapore in this novel. I really like the theme of what do we owe our family? What does it mean to be in a family? What is the deepness of a blood tie versus just a friendship? And so I think the relationship between these two sisters, who are related by blood but not from the same nuclear family, is really interesting. They definitely have a very fraught relationship. Just Arin coming in as an outsider and that kind of threatening Genevieve's relationship with her mom. And then her parents also have kind of a fraught relationship and end up divorcing later. But just how close they become, but then they also are unable to maintain that closeness and that friendship. Arin becomes kind of famous. She becomes an actress, kind of a celebrity and influencer first. Actually, she kind of takes part in these small YouTube productions in Singapore, which is kind of interesting, and then becomes famous. Genevieve just really kills herself working on schoolwork, but then maybe doesn't live up to her full potential. I really liked how Singapore was depicted. I read a lot of Singlit, and sometimes the descriptions of like the kopitiam and the HDBs can feel almost stereotypical. I think for me, I do prefer Singlit that takes place in the 90s and afterward. A lot of the stuff that I've read that's more around like the founding of the nation or the pioneer generation really feels kind of caricaturish. So I think that's also why I really liked The Original Daugher. I also think Jemimah did a good job of depicting more working class Singapore and just really building that sense and that feeling of how stressful it can be, the culture of having to study so hard and cram and stay up all hours, doing tuition and stuff like that. And also just this feeling of crampedness of them all living in the same HDB flat. So I thought that was done really well. And again, I love the themes around the bond between the two sisters and kind of how they navigate that. For me, some of the drawbacks, I do feel that the central tension and the big plot point that leads to a big falling out between Genevieve and Arin was a little bit, I just didn't like it. If anyone has read the book, let me know what you think. I don't want to spoil. It's when Genevieve goes to New Zealand to work and she's struggling and she kind of wants to take a break from Singapore. She also like doesn't have the best relationship with her mom. And then what goes down there leads to a big break between her and Arin, and it just felt a little bit overly dramatic. I don't know. I would love to know what other people think. I didn't love that as like a plot point for what drives the sisters apart. The other thing I didn't like is 98% of the book is quite clear-eyed, I feel, and like very trying to be realistic, like showing the good and the bad and just the complexities of this difficult family situation. But then the ending I thought was too much of a happy ending and didn't suit the rest of the book. So I'm going to share a little bit of what Jemimah talked about in the event that I went to, because I think actually it did help clear up a little bit my concern, or not my concerns, what I was thinking about the book. So in terms of what the book is about, I feel like what Jemimah was trying to write about is exactly what I received as a reader, which is always like really fun when you like kind of get what the author is trying to do. But just if it's interesting for you guys to know, it actually took her 9 years to write, and it was 2 years that she was working on it with an editor. She also talked a little bit about like the business of pitching a book, getting the book sold. This is her debut novel, if I'm not wrong. Yes, this is her debut novel, and for a debut novel, it's fantastic. I read a lot of debut novels where you can really feel it's a debut novel. This one, I think you can kind of tell it's a debut novel, but I loved it. Like I said, I immediately bought several copies for my friends, but she did have her writing published in other short form publications. So she did talk to the alumni club a little bit about the business of that, and that was kind of interesting, although I'm never going to be a writer, so it's not necessarily that relevant to me. But she says that this book is about what frictions can love endure, and to me that's just spot on, because the two sisters, as well as like the mom and Genevieve, obviously love each other, but there's all these things which Jemimah calls a smaller crime, is what she calls it. She calls it a small betrayal, as a kind of language no one else is privy to. And she refers to something called like a moral code of being together. And I just think this is so brilliant and genius, and it really reflects in the story because, and I also, it resonates with me just in my own friendships and relationships with my family. There are things that have been built up over years and years of knowing someone, and in many ways that can provide a lot of comfort and stability and joy. But on the flip side, you can also harm someone in a way that no one else can because of that context. And sometimes things that you do to someone you love, if you described it to someone else or to an outsider or to an external observer, they wouldn't even realize what it means to that person in your relationship within your own context. Does that make sense? And so this whole book is about these smaller crimes and like what these relationships full of love can endure in terms of these little frictions and big frictions that keep building up year after year. And this happens in all cultures and among all people, but I think especially in Asian cultures, it can be hard to express yourself, especially at that time or when this book is taking place, openly and directly. And so a lot of it, but this is true for all cultures, like when you're an adolescent or when you're a kid, there's all these things that are like intuited or just understood. And a lot of times that can build a very deep and tight relationship, but it also means that you have a lot of power over this person and can hurt them in a way that other people cannot. So that's kind of what she talks about the main thrust of the book being. She also says that the book is about the difference between like the legal or the law way of doing something and the right way of doing something. And I feel like that's also a weapon that can be used in everyday relationships. You can say like, oh, I did it the right way, or I did what that person wanted me to do, but was it actually like morally correct? Like given your context with that person in your relationship, was it the most kind thing to do? And I think that really resonates in a lot of the plot points in this book, and especially how Aaron and Genevieve treat each other and their expectations of each other. It's really interesting because you only get Genevieve's point of view in this book, and I would have loved to get Aaron's point of view because I just think it would be so fruitful and fascinating. Genevieve has a lot of frustration pulsing underneath her character and a lot of perceived slights, but I feel that maybe Aaron didn't really mean to slight her, you know what I mean? So it just would have been interesting if there had been a little bit of Aaron's point of view, or maybe that would be a separate project. But I think Aaron, as the one that got added into this family dynamic and was kind of the orphan and the one who was abandoned, like she had a lot of her own internal trauma and stuff to deal with. And it's really interesting that Jemimah Wei decided to focus on Genevieve's point of view. She did say in the talk that originally the book was third person. Oh, actually, according to my notes, she wrote from the point of view of Aaron, the mother and the grandmother. But then, I don't know, I didn't write down why she eventually decided to do Genevieve. But she also says that Aaron and Jen's love for each other ends up being one of the worst things for each of them in their lives. Yeah, I just feel like that point is so cutting and kind of dark. Then for the ending to be so happy felt disjointed. Actually, Jemimah Wei talks about, and I think this might be a pitfall of having a debut novel, is I feel with a debut novel, you kind of want it to represent your worldview, and you want it to, I would imagine, I don't know as an author, but I feel that it's probably almost an extension of yourself. And so what she said in the talk is that she felt a responsibility as an artist to leave a feeling of optimism as her message. So then I'm like, okay, that's why you made it a happy ending. But that doesn't work for me, right? Like the whole book has to have the undertone of leaving an optimistic message, or it all has to fit together to do that. You can't just like have a dark book and then like slap a happy ending on the end, and then that is you leaving positivity into the world as an author. But I'll cut her some slack. I think like because it was her first book, she kind of wanted to like have that message, but I really don't think it was necessary, and it kind of like soured me a little bit on the overall book. Another interesting point that she made is that in Singapore during this time, there's no roadmap on how to live because the pace of change was so fast that each generation is living in a completely different situation, which I thought was interesting. I mean, a lot of places have had really rapid development, but Singapore, it just feels like is extremely impacted by how quick. I mean, I guess you can't really beat Singapore. There are other like city-states that also have built a lot, but that's definitely a theme throughout the book, is just not being able, the different generations not being able to understand each other, and that feeling of not knowing how to navigate your way. I also think she did a great job of depicting the importance of childhood agency or lack thereof, and especially in this kind of stressful situation in Singapore where everyone is still kind of struggling a little bit and trying to define what success looks like, and there's a lot of pressure to like be better for the future. The children, I do think, get to play more and like do more things than they would today in 2026 Singapore, but there's still a lot of pressure and lack of agency among the kids. And I really like the parts of the book where Genevieve and Aaron are younger and they're so perceptive and they're just trying to like navigate the adults and figure out what's going on. So I highly recommend checking out the original Daugher. There are a few flaws, but overall it was a really good read and a really heartwarming read. And I really loved like most of the book except for the ending and that one plot point, because I just feel that it really captures the feeling of being like a young perceptive girl who is navigating a lot of difficult changes. And I feel that the depiction of Singapore is quite deep, and it's its own character. She's really saying something about what it would feel like. She's trying to imagine what it would feel like to live in Singapore in that context. And I think that does it a lot more justice than maybe some other books I've read. I won't call them out, where Singapore is more like a kampong background or like this very, almost one-dimensional HDB background. So thanks for watching my new series called Singlit Shelf. If you guys have any recs for other Singlit for me to read, I have a long list because I have fallen off the wagon a little bit. I am somehow now in like 3 book clubs and none of them are interested in Singaporean literature so far. So I'll just have to keep trucking away on my own. But Happy New Year, Happy Chinese New Year. I just went to a Yusheng Lohe for lunch today, although apparently you're not supposed to wear red for the year of the fire dragon or the year of the fire horse, but I wanted to wear red anyway. So hope everyone has good health and prosperity this year, and thanks for watching.